Hello, Iowa Kimolera here, and welcome to the Athletic FC podcast. So, Roma have sacked a second manager in less than 2 months and are now in talks to bring former coach Claudio Ranieri out of retirement. So, can Ranieri stabilise the turbulent Italian club? And what is the latest on Roma's owners, the Friedkin Group, and their proposed takeover of Everton? I'm joined by the Athletics Italian writer James Horncastle, and later on, our Everton correspondent Paddy Boyland will pop in to give us the latest on that Everton takeover. All right, James, let's start, man. Look, you've reported that Roma are now working on a deal to appoint 73-year-old Claudio Ranieri as their manager in a caretaker role until the end of the current season. So Roma are turning to, I guess, yet another club hero after Daniel De Rossi was sacked in September. Ranieri is currently retired. Why on earth would he take the job, or why on earth would he take this on?
It's a good question, Io. I mean, it's an affair of the heart, I suppose, for
Mm,
him, because it's the club of his town. He is
mm,
Roman, and he came through the ranks at Roma. I mean, this would be his third spell, his second in very similar circumstances to his last one, which was back in 2019, when the previous owners of Roma, the chairman Jim Pallotta,
mm.
things had started to go wrong. He, in trying to take the club to the next level, had brought on Monchi as the sporting director, and Monchi, and this will come as a surprise to anyone who has sort of signed up to brand Monchi. He was a disaster. And they sacked their manager Eusebio Di Francesco in the spring, and Ranieri kind of came in, kept his hand on the tiller, steadied everything,
Mm.
and oversaw difficult circumstances such as De Rossi, who was then a player, not getting a new contract. So in these troubled times, he is like Rome's nonno, the granddad, who comes in, he will command respect in the dressing room.
Mm.
He'll placate the fan base, which has been very hostile for the last 6 weeks. By placate, I mean that they will be supportive of him. They will perhaps begin to support the team more, but I don't think it really does anything much to change how the ultras and the crowd feels about the ownership at the moment, which needs a strong figure within the club because there are no strong figures within the club. There is not a chief executive. The sporting director is young, doesn't speak Italian. And so that is ultimately why they have turned to Ranieri as they are, 12th, 4 defeats in their last 5 games in the league, worst start in 20 years, having spent 100 million in the transfer window.
But I could also sort of understand the romance of it. Ranieri, obviously, Premier League champion. Obviously, the work he did with Cagliari, rescuing them from relegation, which is brilliant, And you think of the short term, that potentially could make a lot of sense. But, what has the reaction fans been to the ongoing turmoil? You sort of mentioned it there with the Friedkin Group, but also more importantly, the potential of Ranieri returning.
So, I mean, the news of Ranieri sort of flying to London for talks with the Friedkins sort of happened late last night. I would say that fans are on the many radio stations that only talk about Roma for 24 hours of every day. They would be in favor of this. In favor insofar that he's Italian, he's Roma, he understands the club, he understands them, and that's important right now because they don't feel like the owners understand them at all. And there was certainly a lot of preoccupation over the last week or so when some of the names were coming out. Frank Lampard was named as
Yes, I saw
someone
that.
who was of interest. I'm told that didn't really ever take off. Edin
Okay.
Terzic was another, and I think there was a feeling that the fans just would not tolerate an outsider coming into this. Another person who doesn't speak the language, another person who doesn't
Mm.
understand or get the club. Um, but I suppose this gives the Friedkins time to actually reset and restructure the club, because at the moment there isn't a chief executive. the chief executive, Lina Sololuku, she resigned shortly after Daniele De Rossi was sacked. It was a
Mm.
very hostile environment around her. Fans showing up at the training ground asking where she was. T-shirts been printed saying, where is she? Not very nice environment for someone to work or live in.
Mm.
And you can understand why this process to find the chief executive is taking some time, because I think everyone, even if you have like a superficial grasp of what's going on at Roma, it's a
Mm.
very difficult situation for somebody to walk into.
Yeah, well, let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about Duric and also him leaving Roma, because following their 3-2 loss to Bologna on Sunday, their fifth defeat of the campaign, Ivan Duric was dismissed. Let's really get a sense of why he was appointed in the first place, who sort of appointed him, James, and also how influential is the Friedkin Group in these managerial appointments for Roma. Because also, I think about De Rossi. I mean, they gave him a long-term contract, and all of a sudden, get Jurickin. It's quite unstable, it seems.
Yeah, it's difficult to know where to start. I mean, if we look at the decision to hire Juric in the first place, I mean, that came about because Sololiku was said to have very strong ties with his agent, Giuseppe
Mm,
Rizzo, someone she worked with at Olympiacos in a past job, who works for Monza, where Giuseppe Rizzo has a lot of power or a lot of players. And at Roma as well, the senior players, Brian Cristante and Gianluca Mancini, are represented by the same agent. So there was a feeling that, okay, bring in a coach who is repped by this guy, that will work. Yeah, it didn't work. And I think whilst Juric has made mistakes over the last 6 weeks,
mm,
for example, in the 5-1 defeat to Fiorentina, substituting his senior players after half an hour, um, real challenge to them.
mm,
And then those senior players not to come out in the second half to sit on the dugout with the rest of their players. Um, for him to basically tell a press conference he wasn't going to call up Paulo Dybala for the weekend's game when Paulo Dybala was waiting to go for a fitness test to show he could be fit to play in that game.
mm,
A lot of like little mistakes like that, which paid for him. But he was a dead man walking from just being not Daniele De Rossi.
mm,
Because I think that the problem that the Friedkins created for themselves was that, when they hired Jose Mourinho, there was always the prospect that Jose Mourinho would become bigger than the club in the same way that Francesco Totti was bigger than the club in the
mm,
past, that you could no longer distinguish Roma from Totti, Roma from Mourinho. And so sacking him, no matter how bad the football was, and no matter the fact that they were ninth in the table, was always going to be deeply unpopular. And in order to kind of keep the fans on side, they hired De Rossi last January. Now, the risk with that is that by hiring him, it means that one day you are going to have to fire him. And I think maybe in hindsight, they should have just hired another regular guy as a coach,
mm.
not someone who was identified as one of them by the fans, by the ultras, who did really well in the first 2.5 months of him taking over. Got Roma to a Champions League, a Europa League semi-final, hammered Roberto De Zerbi's Brighton, knocked out AC Milan in the cup. And, it was between the first and second legs of that quarter-final against AC Milan where the Friedkins put out a statement saying they wanted to give De Rossi the job on a permanent basis. And it felt like they'd let their emotions get ahead of them. Why didn't they wait until the end of the season when things started to tail off a bit for De Rossi?
Mm.
And then over the summer, they gave him a 3-year contract. They spent 100 million in the transfer market. How much influence did De Rossi have? It seems that he didn't get the players that he wanted, that this new
Okay.
sporting director, Florent Gisolfi, and Lina Sololuku, they were also influencing who they wanted or who they thought should join the club.
Mm,
And it became a mess. But the optics of sacking a club legend just 3 or 4 games into the season, having given him a 3-year contract, and spent 100 million on the team, with a lot of players arriving late in the transfer window and some after the transfer window, like Mats Hummels and Hermoso, um, was seen as unjust, not only by the fans, but also by the media, and has really kind of aligned those two parties against the Friedkins.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about Everton fans right now. Obviously, rumored, actually, it's probably rumored, we've spoken about it, that the Friedkin Group are looking to take over Everton. For the ones that are listening right now, um, I know we'll talk about Everton shortly, but like, what is the current state of Roma? And also, what do you think this also says about the Friedkin Group and their ownership of football clubs?
Well, I mean, if we'd had this podcast a year ago, Io, I think the Friedkins were the most popular owners in Italy.
Mm,
Their first move was like, we're going to hire a big name manager, Jose Mourinho. And it was like, oh my God, like we never thought we would get Jose Mourinho, let alone him be on the
mm,
bench. And then they won something, which was a tournament that had not existed until Mourinho came to Rome, which was the Conference League. And their rivals said it's a tin pot trophy when they won it, but they won it. And Roma hadn't won anything for 14 years. They didn't care
mm,
that it was called the Conference League, that it didn't exist, that the final was played in Tirana, and the trophy looked like a vase that your mum would put her flowers in, and that sort of thing. I mean, they didn't care about that. It was just something to go out and celebrate. And then they signed Paulo Dybala, who was one of the best players in the last 10 years in Italy. They signed Romelu Lukaku. And so their success in Europe, in winning a Conference League, reaching a Europa League final, signing these big names, even though the squad kept getting older and older, even though the
mm,
wage bill get higher and higher, and they still weren't qualifying for the Champions League, it covered up for a lot. And yeah, they were fortunate really in the favor that they had. But the, the, when they sacked Mourinho, that all changed. It has been this kind of slow reveal for Roma fans, like, oh right, yeah, our squad's really old, isn't it? And we've had to sell some of our best young players in order to keep signing some of these big names. And we keep finishing sixth, don't we? I mean, we never used to finish sixth. We were always in the
mm,
Champions League under Palotta. And why are we trying to push out some of our best players? Like, why are we trying to, make Dybala go to Saudi Arabia? It felt like the club would drive him to Saudi Arabia, and he's our best player. What the hell's going on? Um, and then the treatment of De Rossi kind of really showed a lack of patience, and maybe a sense of desperation that, oh God, we've spent 100 million again and we're not going to get in the Champions League. This is disastrous. What are we doing? And so I think, if the big criticism of them is that they don't seem to have a feel for the club.
mm,
Um, which seems at odds with everything that I've just said, which is like, oh, they understand that modern football fans, they don't care about analytics and all this sort of thing. They just want big names and they want to win stuff, no matter how much it costs. Um, in terms of like their feel for Rome and for Roma, they're like, they used to be at the stadium all the time. They never used to say anything, but we used to always see them. They're never here anymore. Where are they? Have they lost interest? And then this kind of tendency, which look, they've always had this, but they've had maybe stronger figures in sporting directors than they do have now. Where they're like, why are they trusting all of these external companies and these consultancies that are based in London and Los Angeles to basically recommend them people to come in and be executives for our club? They don't understand our club. They don't understand our city, and that's why things are going wrong. They need Romans there,
mm,
and
mm.
so I think from an Everton perspective, you look at this and say, okay, anyone but Moshiri is better. Brilliant. Okay. But I mean, I also feel that English football fans, no matter how much they talk on social media and how much football is a massive part of our discourse, they are nothing like Italian fans. They're nothing
Mm.
like, they are not going to say, you know what, we're not going to come to the game for the first 15 minutes. And when we come there, we're going to whistle and we're going to pull out banners. And even when you win 3-0 with the new coach you've appointed, we're still going to whistle every pass that they make. We're still going to whistle when they come over and think we're going to celebrate them for winning 3-0. We are going to appear outside of your house with banners and
Wow.
fireworks. We are going to show up outside the school with your kids. We are going to do all this sort of thing. Okay. English football fans are meek and mild compared to Italians, and
Yeah.
and particularly Romans. And I think,
Mm.
maybe as much as this is the Friedkins adding another asset to their sports portfolio in Everton, it's a quieter life being an English football owner. It's a much quieter, easier life. Owners are not expected to speak. Executives are not expected to speak. It's so much quieter. And so, I'm not sure. I'm not. Yeah, people wonder: are they looking to sell Rome? Are they looking to get out? Yeah,
Mm.
from everything that has been briefed, no, they're in it for the long term at Roma. Blah blah blah. But I mean, it's an easier life being a Premier League football owner than it is being an owner of Roma.
Well, I tell you what, while all this is going on at Roma, the group that own the Italian club are also trying to buy Everton, of course. Let's welcome our Everton writer, Paddy Boyland, to join us. Paddy, 6 weeks have passed since the Friedkin Group agreed to buy Farhad Moshiri's 94% stake in the club. So why has it taken so long to finalise from your perspective?
I think the easy answer is it's not actually right now taking longer than expected. I mean,
Okay.
when this was announced in late September, we were told by most around the situation that they expected something to come through in December. Optimistically, start of December, some felt it could drag on closer to Christmas. So I think the process is just so far unfurling more or less as you would expect it to. There's been several regulatory hurdles that most supporters will be aware of here, and I think the big pillar in that sense is the Premier League's owners and directors test, which just does take some time. They need to
Mm.
analyse financial accounts, they need to speak to the Friedkins themselves to get a sense of what their plan is for Everton moving forward. As we know, it's more stringent than it used to be, so that will just take a bit of time. And the other element to this, which is maybe equally important, is not a regulatory phase as such, but it's
Mm.
tying up and finding a way to get rid of some of the club's external debt. Like one of the big key pillars here is a £200 million loan to former would-be owners, 777 partners. And that debt position is now being assumed by an insurance firm in the US, one of their major creditors called ACAP. And what's basically happening right now is that ACAP and 777 are being sued for fraud, alleged fraud in the US
Wow.
court in New York. And the Friedkins are in the middle of this, trying to find a way to pay off ACAP without destroying agreements in the New York court. So it's very fiddly and very messy. And this was always going to be the logical conclusion to Farhad Moshiri's Everton. It was never going to be a simple transition from one ownership to another. But you've got lots of moving parts. And I think sometimes when I'm asked the question by fans, when is this actually going to happen? I kind of just have to fudge a little bit and say, well, how long is a piece of string? Probably most people suggest sometime in December, but
Yeah.
let's see. Um, from previous experience, the other thing that can happen here is if this is not tied up by Christmas, what tends to happen with the Premier League is that the league and its offices more or less shut down for a couple of
Mm.
periods. It was a frustration this time last year when with 777 partners when they were trying to get their takeover over the line. And it might be a frustration again this time if it's not done by them. But I think most people are quite happy with the current trajectory. There's nothing particularly untoward so far, and most people expect the Freakins to be in situ before the January transfer window.
Yeah, I just wonder what kind of impact this has on Everton. Obviously, I feel like once the takeover was announced, it felt like an initial bounce.
Yeah.
I don't know, it looked like it on the pitch anyway. But also, I wonder in the background, Paddy. There's a lot of people probably sitting here within Everton Football Club thinking, "Will I have a job soon? Like, what's going to happen when this all lands and they take over? There's already a mounting debt on the club. Will I be here next season?"
Yeah, I think that's completely fair enough. What we tend to see when ownership changes hands is that new people come in and they want to implant their own ideas, have new figures in place, and show that there's going to be some form of material change from the old regime. With Everton, you've got very unique circumstances, of course, as well. You have in Sean Dyche a manager who is now into the final 6 months of his deal. You have a director of football in Kevin Thelwell, who's into the final 6 months of his deal too.
Mm.
You have a threadbare board, and this will be familiar to Roma fans who are listening to this, a very threadbare board in, I would suggest, urgent need of reinforcement. And the positive way to spin that, of course, is that it gives the Friedkins scope very early doors to do what they need to do. The slightly less positive one is that there's an awful lot to do straight off the bat. The early impressions we've got are that first of all, they're quiet. They're not saying an awful lot about their plans for the club right now. They want to be in situ before they start to communicate more with fans. But in the background, work is already underway in terms of, I suppose, deciphering what the top structure at Everton will be, who will be on the board, potential names, what the structure will look like, and then how it all filters down to manager, director of football, and so on. And most of the focus right now is not on Sean Dyche's future or Kevin Thelwell there. It's on
Okay.
who do we want in those top positions, CEO, chairman, to kind of create the vision and move Everton forward, for want of a better phrase. So a really, really interesting period where, I mean, as I wrote in a piece the other day, it kind of feels as though everybody's auditioning to be part of it, of Everton moving forward. Sean Dyche, Kevin Thelwell, everybody's under scrutiny. And in the middle of
Players
all of
included,
this,
actually. Yeah, think about it.
players too, ahead of the January transfer window and the summer, staff members who've been there long term, everybody's trying to put their best foot forward and impress. But certainly on the pitch, results and performances haven't been very good recently.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I find interesting is when they put out a statement that they were looking to get regulatory approval from the Premier League for this takeover. I saw some of the reaction by Evertonians on social media, and there was a gratitude almost that we're hearing from an ownership group, we're hearing from people. I wouldn't be surprised if, but for a statement that says, we have got that approval that we needed, that you never hear from the Friedkins again.
Yeah.
Because they are Sphinx-like. You can see them, but you don't hear from them. And for that was actually quite clever when they took over at Roma, because the previous owner, Jim Pallotta, was very passionate, very outspoken, and would call out things he didn't like. They used to have their own in-house radio station at Roma to control the narrative that was being put out by all the other radio stations in Rome. And he once called the fans effing idiots. And so there was a feeling that, okay, it's better if we don't say anything, but we're seeing that we're present, that we're on the ground, and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't hear the Friedkins actually say anything. We might see them say stuff in print. But like there was a moment over the summer where Roma got approval for a stadium, the Friedkin's own stadium, not the one that was being designed by the guy who's designed Everton's stadium, because that was the Stadio della Roma by the old owner. And there was excitement because it was like, actually, we might hear Ryan Friedkin, the son, say something for the first time. We actually might hear his voice. We might understand, who he is. And he briefly said something. I can't remember. It's Forza Roma or Die Roma. Come on, Roma, something like that. And that was it. And there was a real hope that they would come out and address the fans in the midst of this crisis, which is going on at the club at the moment. And that hasn't happened, but for a couple of statements, which I think in retrospect, they would look back on with some regret, because when they hired Ivan Duric to replace Daniele De Rossi, they said, they hope to be winning trophies with him. He's been sacked after 6 weeks. And then the other frustration, which I'm interested to get I'm interested to see how this develops. Paddy was saying how, they have a real opportunity here to shape the club in the image, that they want, because there are sporting directors, other directors with deals coming up. Frustration with Roma is that often these vacancies have been left open for far too long. Like when they took over in COVID from Palotta, it took them. They ended up letting the chief executive at the time, Guido Fienga, do the transfer market. Because they didn't have a sporting director, and the sporting director Tiago Pinto is now at Bournemouth, didn't take over until January that year. Pinto, earlier this year, basically said, "I'm leaving at the end of the January transfer window." They didn't replace him until sort of May of this year, with Florent Ghisolfi, who you can understand why sort of, external consultancy firms go, "Oh, look, this guy worked for Nice, where the Sir Jim Radcliffe, Ineos, Dave Brailsford, culture, blah, blah, blah." And so far, Ghisolfi, it's early days, but he's been a disaster. But I mean, they should have a head start. I wouldn't say they have a head start, but this entire process of them passing the owners and directors test, sort of jumping these legal hurdles, which Paddy has spoken about in New York, it should give them time to actually, okay, get our ducks in a row. This is the person we want to appoint for chief executive. This is the person we want to appoint for sporting director. There's a lot to be kind of interested by in terms of how they act, but the pace of how they act, I think, is something that Evertonians need to sort of be aware of as well.
Yeah, that's a fair point, James. And before you jumped on, Paddy, James was talking about how he feels English fans are relatively meek in comparison to Italian fans.
They are!
But come on, where Everton are, that is a close-knit community who have got a big voice, right? This is my thing, Paddy.
I'm not disputing that, but I think the way they the way English fans project dissent is very different.
How then, Paddy, if you look at this takeover and it doesn't go as desired, as what James has basically been talking about with the Friedkin Group, how do you think Everton fans are going to react? Because let's face it, they've had quite a few years of really weird turmoil and indecisiveness under Moshiri, and also huge debt as well, and also performances from a team that you would think should be doing better.
Yeah, they've had a really tough few years in every sense. I mean, not just on the pitch with successive relegation battles, but even at times it's felt like the club has been at civil war, in the sense where you've had disputes between fans and board members leaving. Pretty similar to some of what's happened in Rome, but I would suggest kind of much more dialed down to echo James's point. Fans are now ready for something different, and they have been ready for something different for quite some time. They've had to get used to begrudgingly this period of stasis while we wait for the next chapter, and are very eager to see signs with a new stadium on the horizon, potential for changes high up in the club. Eager to see signs that the club is actually going to start to move in the right direction finally after years of mismanagement. I think it's a huge opportunity for anybody, and you benefit. It's not like a succession with Alex Ferguson where it's a poison chalice as a manager, and you're going to struggle to get anywhere near what Ferguson did. In Moshiri's case, he's failed so spectacularly that anybody that wants to take this project on and isn't him is going to be given some good grace. certainly for the first year or so. And there's a lot of promise here as well. So after years of turmoil, the fact that people are wanting to come in and invest in the club, whatever you say about the Friedkins and how they've run Roma, they have invested significantly. The promise of Everton having a fighting chance in the market, the promise of Everton moving to a new stadium with high revenues, that gives supporters something to cling on to, even during these really tough moments like now, where they're watching pretty dire football, results haven't been what they maybe should be, given the fixture list. And they're kind of just wanting everything to finish and for Moshiri to be out the door, and whoever it is at this stage, the Friedkins, to just come in and start that next phase.
And do you think that this promise is dependent also on Everton staying in the Premier League? Let's face it, they're not far off the relegation zone at this moment in time.
Yeah, so I don't think the takeover is dependent on that. But I think one of the things that the Friedkins will want, one of the reasons for the Friedkins to press ahead with this and to want this takeover to be rubber stamped quite so quickly, is that you've got a January transfer window coming up. Really important in theory. Final stint of the season where Everton have to stay in the Premier League to take advantage of some of the opportunities we've spoken about there. If Everton are a championship club come next season, I still think the odds are they will have enough
Okay.
over the final 6 months or so. But if Everton are a championship club, then it becomes less of an attractive proposition even to the Friedkins, doesn't it? Their pitch is, we take an underperforming Premier League club with a sizable fan base, a new stadium that's already been built for us, rather than all the hurdles they have to go through in Rome. And this can be our baby. It can be something that we grow, and there's untapped potential here that we can take advantage of.
I think Everton going into the Championship is the only way this is acceptable to Roma fans. because this is a real issue for them in Rome. Is that, if you're seeking to prioritize another club, I mean, most of these multi-club, operations work when you have clubs that you've got one big club, the crown jewel, and then you've got other smaller clubs around it. You can't have clubs that are kind of commensurate in size. And, every penny that is spent in Everton will be seen as a penny out of Roma, which it's not the case, but they'll be like, hang on a minute, regardless of our financial fair play situation at Roma, how are you spending this on that player for Everton? We would like that player or something like that. And that's that's going to be an issue. And so, you do have a significant portion of the fan base at Roma now kind of wishing a sale to happen. Which is, kind of what Everton fans are wishing for in terms of, Moshiri's finally getting this sale over the line to the Friedkins. So, it's the dynamics of this are, I think, unprecedented, when you consider, for example, how, you had the Pozzos at Watford and Udinese, and, Udinese are, the probably the meekest club in Italy, when it comes to protest, because they're on the Slovenian border. It's very cold. But at least, but there was a time when, Udinese would go out and get Alexis Sanchez and all this sort of thing. And they were the figurehead of that whole thing. And then all of a sudden Watford is signing Richarlison. And it's like, hang on a minute. Like, Richarlison would usually come to us. And so if there's any feeling of that at Roma, it will not go down well again. And, there's all kinds of people putting two and two together and getting six within the Roma fan base by looking at their front of shirt sponsor, Riyadh Season, by seeing them signing this Saudi right back out of the Saudi Pro League, by, sort of leaked drawings of their third shirt looking like Saudi shirt. Like, like what's going, is this actually going to happen? And yeah, I mean, it's just bizarre how in the space of 11 months, you can go from the most popular owners in Roma in Italy to your fans wishing a sale.
Okay. Well, let's leave it there. Everton fans, get ready. No doubt we're going to be doing another podcast on this before the season is over. Gents, thank you so much for your time, James, Paddy, and we'll be back tomorrow. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.